We are back on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio, News Talk 1180, 1230 KGEO, 1410 KERI, and 1000 KKIM in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Our guest by phone, author, speaker, consultant, Doug Johnson.
Doug, I wanted to thank you for sharing all those positives about Obamacare. Now, do you have any negatives you want to bring out?
Well, let's see. We're not going to drag the audience down any more than we have, but, I think this brings up a bigger point and an important point. I have been saying, and many people have been saying, we have leadership that has failed us on both sides of the aisle in Washington and on state levels and local levels around the country. But the fact is, the message America needs to hear is that it's not just the politicians' fault, it's our fault. We have allowed this to happen.
Amen.
And so we must be involved. We must make change. We can't just, sit at home and listen to our favorite talk radio shows or watch our favorite TV shows or, continue to go on down the path we have. We must get actively involved if we want to save this country for our children and grandchildren. It is so deep, the situation we are in, that we cannot turn this around in one generation. This is going to be a huge, huge project.
We've even got Mr. Weiner in New York who's going to be running for governor back there. After what he did, he shouldn't even be in politics.
No, he shouldn't, and actually I think most people who are in politics probably shouldn't be, because we have made it so difficult for good, honorable people to go and serve their country, serve their community, serve their state. We've made it so difficult that the kind of people we've allowed to go into office are people who simply promise the voters little goodies, they're Santa Claus, and so they've bought their votes, and the end result is we now have a system that is so overburdened that we can hardly stand it. And we compromise values, and people say things like, well, his personal life doesn't affect his public life, and I beg to differ with that. I think it does. I think character starts in the home. It starts in your heart. It starts when you're all alone. What you do when you're alone and nobody's looking says who you really are. And if I can't trust you on a personal, in your personal life, how can I trust you in your public life?
Well, we're seeing how the Democratic Party destroyed Mitt Romney's character, and how they're going to continue to destroy anybody who's going to run for president against Hillary next time around.
Yeah, and especially if it's a minority. If you put, look what they did to Herman Cain, and they've already gone after Dr. Ben Carson, who hasn't even said he's going to run. But their greatest fear, of course, is a minority that is conservative, because that really, really flies in the face of what they want people to believe. They do not want people to understand the truth of history, that the Republican Party, and I will say I'm not the biggest Republican fan anymore. I'm an independent, and I'm very disappointed in much of the Republican Party these days. But the history of the Republican Party is they were the party that fought all the evils of slavery. They fought for equal rights. They did all the positive things, and for whatever reason, they have allowed Democrats to take credit for things that they didn't do, and it amazes me. And even getting away from that, you go to the 90s, and here's Bill Clinton claiming this great economy that he created. The great economy by Bill Clinton was not created until the Republican Congress under Newt Gingrich came in and put forth things that forced Bill Clinton to go along with them, and that was Reagan principles that turned the economy back around. So they claim something, and the Republicans won't even stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, we're responsible for that, you're not. And so the voters sit at home and are confused because they don't know history.
Well, and I blame the Republican Party for that. And contrary to what people may think, Abraham Lincoln was the first Republican president. So
absolutely.
Yep. I
fear that the Republican Party is getting to the point where the Whig Party, which the Republican Party replaced,
right.
Yeah, they're starting to look like that, and they're going to get replaced.
Yeah. Our guest by phone, author, speaker, consultant, Doug Johnson. Doug, I want to switch gears for a second. You had an interesting perspective on your blog on the Boston Marathon. You want to talk a little bit about that, the events that happened around Boston?
Sure, and it is a very upsetting thing, because terrorism is scary, and our natural reaction when something that bad happens is we want to protect ourselves. So our first reaction, just by instinct as humans, is to say, what can I do to be safer? And it's really easy to say, I'll give up some of my freedom to have more security. And it's the worst thing we can do, because that does not protect us. The only thing that will protect us is truth. And we have become a society of political correctness. So we can only question certain things, we can only do certain things, we can only say certain things, and what we now have is when something like this happens, we have a media and a group of politicians who immediately start screaming and blaming the right. They really can't show any history of the right doing these things, but they claim it. And unfortunately, the sad part is that the real issue should not be, gee, this group or that group is responsible. It should be, who did this? We're going to hold them accountable, find them, and prosecute them. Now, if there are certain criteria we should follow that are representative of the typical kind of people who do this, then we should look at that. In this case, and a lot of people don't like it, but it's true, the problems we have, and we see it around the world over and over again, is there are Islamic extremists that are doing these things. And yet our government, we saw it at Fort Hood in Texas when all those people were killed. That man was a Muslim extremist, and yet they actually refuse to call it that. They refer to it in our government as workplace violence. And when we do this, we do nothing but reduce our safety because we're not willing to ask the questions necessary to protect ourselves. We should be looking at people who are successful at protecting themselves and copy what they do. And of course, the best example, that's Israel. They're not afraid to profile. They're not afraid to ask the tough questions.
You know, I was channel surfing last night, and I happened to come across a station called Fox. And,
yeah.
And yeah.
Heard of them.
And they had a survey, and they said 92% of the population believes that the government is not doing enough to protect us from terrorism.
And I guess my question is, and I'm not surprised by that, but my question is, so what are we as citizens and as voters doing to change our government to take it back so it does protect us?
Yeah, good point. We've got about 2.5 minutes left, Doug, and one place I want to go with you is you had an interesting article. I haven't had a chance to talk to Clay about this, but talk a little bit about the NSA data center. That's a little scary.
It is scary. There's a data center that the NSA has been building in Utah. It's, from what I understand, about 25, 30 miles or so south of Salt Lake City, I guess. And it's designed to pick up communications and electronic information from around the world, and it will store all this data so they can use it to supposedly protect us. And it's capable when finished. It'll be finished later this year. It'll be capable of being able to store all the data from around the world, 100 years of that data at today's level of technology. So huge amounts of data. And we already know the NSA has already violated civil rights and the Constitution in the past and gotten in trouble for it and caused problems. But they're saying it's to protect us so they can monitor and watch for possible terrorist activity. And that's a wonderful thought if they can do that. But what scares most people who know about this thing is, what else are they going to do? What are they going to be listening to? And your emails, your phone calls, this program, all this stuff will be kept, and they will be able to go through it and look at it. And when you lose privacy, you really lose a lot of freedom. And it's not that any of us necessarily have something to hide. It's that we have a right to privacy. We have a right to our lives. But our country, our government, has decided that we are subject to them instead of them being subject to us, and this is a real turnaround of the way our government was designed. You know,
when I saw that article, it made me think of a friend of mine who explained to me that, the right to privacy is found in the penumbra or the shades of the Constitution. So here it is, they make up this law, this right to privacy, and then all of a sudden they turn around and now they're violating their own conclusion, their own law, by having the NSA tape things like this. I mean, it's really nobody's business. We are a free society, at least we should be.
Protect us or prosecute us, which is the way they're going to use it.
Exactly.
Well, and that's it. And I think the thing that we have to say, and people don't like this, especially people on the right, is this is not just Democrats. This is not just a certain political party. The people on the so-called right, the mainstream Republicans, or what I call the establishment Republicans, have been very much behind this and supporting this kind of activity too. And so this didn't just start with this administration. We have problems on both sides of the aisle. What we need are true constitutional conservatives who will stand up and say, our principles of government found in the Constitution are the most important. Ron Paul, who I did not agree with on everything he had to say in the last election, but he had some good things to say, especially about economics we should have been listening to.
I agree, Doug. We got to go. And I highly recommend horsesenseblog.com. Doug, thanks, and we got to have you back.
Okay.
We'll be back in 167 hours on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio News Talk 1180.